Okay, so what we're going to do today is we are going, I feel like Ray Charles, we're going to start doing integer linear programming. So far we haven't really done too much on integer linear programming. Why might we want to do something like integer linear programming?
Because it's realistic.
Because it's realistic. Why is it realistic?
Because you can't have half a person.
You can't have half a person. Now, of course, if you look at the stuff for the Lego, we can easily have maybe a third of a person. No. All right. People are not modularized like that. You can't just pull off and have half of a person or something like that. Although we may get to the point, if we have enough people working with us, that you can build the top half of the Lego person. In general, you do not have things like half of a person. You do not have half of a flight from Boston to Los Angeles. Right? The plane flies from Boston to Los Angeles. You have to make decisions as to what is being done. So integer linear programming is wonderful for something like that. And so what I thought we would do is we would start today, we would just do a scheduling problem. So there's lots of different scheduling problems we can do. Movie theaters is one of my favorites. I've written a paper on that with several professors in marketing. And so I thought, if there's no strong objections, let's pretend we own a movie theater. All right. What's the name of our movie theater?
Movie theater.
How do you spell it?
3's.
Okay, there you go. Any of them capitalized?
The middle one.
The middle one.
All of them.
Theater is spelled with an E. Yeah.
Oh, it's good. When you say 3 E's, was it 3 E's in movie or just 3 E's in movie theater?
Reason.
Okay,
And I
great.
want a little axon circumflex over the A.
Is that going this way?
It's like this one.
Oh, the carrot hat. Okay. And in homage to Tom Lear. Does anybody know about that? All right, so look that up. That's in homage to Tom Lear. All right. Hopefully we will do better with the mathematics than we did with the nomenclature. We own movie theater. Okay. What is our goal? Maximize profit. Okay. How do we maximize profit? Yes.
Sell as many tickets as possible.
So we want to maximize profit. I'm going to get a headache looking at this. We sell tickets. Anything else? Yes.
We want to maximize the number of seats filled per screen.
No.
Sell candy.
Sell candy. I'll put food in quotes. For the most part, we'll just talk about selling candy, reasonably priced drinks, popcorn, stuff like that. We're not going to have too many people buying the shirts for the movie theater. Yes.
Sell ads for before the movies.
Okay, sell ads. Excellent. What else?
Figure out the quantity versus price ratio. Like quantity sold versus the price.
Okay,
Compare prices.
that's when I'm trying to figure out how we get our money. Where's our money stream?
Are we looking at profits or revenue streams? Because
Well, we're trying to maximize profit. We need to see where our revenue is coming from. So right now we haven't even thought of costs yet. Okay, so let's see. What other sources of income do we have? I like the sell ads.
Arcades.
So one possibility is you could have arcades and stuff like that. And so these are really important issues. If you look at what happened years ago with the trains, the train industry used to be extremely big in America. Except for the Northeast Corridor, for the most part, the trains do not do much. They've lost out to the airplanes. It's actually a lot more pleasant, I think, to take a train than to take an airplane. And for a lot of places, the time difference is not that much. But we do have an airplane mentality. You've got to remember what business you're in. You're in the business of moving people. Now, that said, you're not going to have trains flying. But you want to think about what are your sources for revenue? Are there any other sources of revenue we have? And so, the idea of maybe we want to have an arcade or something like that. So when people are waiting to see their movie, it's not bad, right? If you have an arcade and people are waiting, what will they do? They'll spend money at an arcade. If you're at a restaurant and you're waiting for your table, what do you often do? For those of you who are over 21.
order
order a drink, right? And so it's a way to get extra revenue. All right, so this is how we get a lot of our profits. What are our costs? Labor. Now, for a lot of these, the question is, what are the fixed costs? What are the variable costs? Are your utilities variable or your utilities fixed?
Variable.
Which is
Variable, I mean, depends per month. If you have a busier season, you're going to pay more for utilities. Well, depending on if you're
Well,
using electric.
I think they're relatively fixed.
they're relatively fixed, but there is one thing you can do that would make your utilities change a little bit.
I guess if you're not using all of your cinemas.
So if you're not using all of your cinemas, if you're staying open late. So a lot of times businesses have to decide when do they want to close. A couple of years ago, my brother and I were visiting my parents in Arizona. They live in a, I'll be generous, I'll call it a young retirement community in case my parents ever watch this video. And my brother and I decided we wanted pizza that night. And we called around 7 p.m. and the pizza place was already closed. And so from their perspective, based on where they were located, it made sense for the pizza place to close by around 7 p.m. because you're not going to have that many people wanting a pizza that late. We just happened to be out of luck that we were visiting. The later you stay open, the more movies you can show, but the more labor you're going to need. You're going to have lights on in the building, heats on in the building. So there could be a little bit of a variable cost here. A lot of times you might simplify the model initially and say, let's just assume for now that these are fixed costs. And then we can tweak it later so that the longer the theater is open, maybe the more costs we get. Right now, I just want you to get some of the ideas and issues that could go on. For labor, do you think labor is a fixed cost or a variable cost?
Variable.
Okay, why variable?
Same reason.
Same reason. Now the problem is then you have to hire people. And when you hire people, they may want a certain number of hours per week. And so depending on how contracts are structured, your labor cost might actually be fixed. Or you might have a couple of people in reserve and say, look, we may need you, and we will call. There is a pizza company, I won't say which one nearby, which has screwed up my orders 2 or 3 times in recent history. There's at least 2 people here who are smiling. They do not have enough drivers. And we may not be using them anymore because I can't, I kind of need same-day service when I put in a pizza order. So you may not be able to expand your labor at a moment's notice and say, oh, a lot of people want to see movies tonight. Let's get a lot of people. You may be stuck paying for labor you don't need for other times. You also have to worry about how much is it going to upset you if somebody is missing. One of my friends was a bartender at Princeton, and he was at the art museum one day, and he was given a very expensive bottle of wine. And he was told, do not open this bottle unless somebody comes up to you and asks for a drink by name. We have a very generous donor who's given us tens of millions of dollars. When he dies, he's giving us the rest. This is his favorite wine. There are 3 stations for alcohol. Each station has a bottle. 2 stations are not going to be touched, and we'll just use those bottles the next time he comes. It is worth it to keep this person happy. And so you don't know when opportunities are going to come, and you want to make sure you can take advantage of them. So you may, unfortunately, be in the situation where you sometimes do things at a loss just to keep certain people from being upset and not coming back in the future. So for instance, the number of people who might come late at night might be very small, but they may give you really bad press. They may tell their friends, they may stop coming. And so you may actually need to stay open later than you want to just to stave off other effects. So depending on how much you analyze, there's a lot of good stuff you can do. All right, we have labor, we have rent and utilities. What else do we have? Yes?
Cost of buying the movies.
Cost of buying the movies. And the cost of buying a movie is not just what you would expect. So what would you expect the cost of buying a movie is? Purchasing the film, right. What I like about this is I can roll my eyes. I feel like Doc Helmet from Spaceballs. Okay, there is buying the film. There are other costs of buying movies. And I don't mean opportunity costs such as you can't show something else. Yes?
Buying the rights
Well, that's equivalent to buying the movie, is buying the rights to show.
Well, in the contract, it would be a number of people who actually see it, some percent of people in the theater, and then how you structure it.
That's not the cost. There's additional cost to the movie, yes.
Well, they sort of stipulate like how long you have to show it for.
Yes. So, I'll just write down some random letters. So, if you happen to write down random letters that happen to correspond to somebody who is extremely powerful, they may be able to put lots of constraints on purchasing their movie. And you may not know at first how bad other random strings of letters might be. And so you might be committed now to showing a certain movie for a long period of time in your best theater, your biggest screen, with a given sound system. Because really, if the sound is not appropriate, you may not truly appreciate the subtleties of this character. And so sometimes if you're a big enough player, you can put in a lot of secondary constraints. And it's not just, you have to give me so much money for the right to show the film. You have to show it on certain screens. You have to show it for a certain number of weeks. And your theater has to have a certain level of technology, or I will not let you show my movie because I don't want people to view my work the wrong way. To figure out how much money you get, it becomes a little bit more complicated. Typically what happens in the movie industry is the longer the movie's been out, the greater share you get of the revenue for each ticket sold. Why do you think this is the case?
Because at first, obviously, they want to capitalize on the royalties by front-loading.
Absolutely. For most movies, most of the money comes in the first week or two. And then there's almost like an exponential decay. So for those of you who are interested in statistics and something like this, a big part of our papers is to try to figure out a really good statistical model for how popular a given movie is going to be as a function not just of time of day, but how long it's been out, what time of year it is. I would like to add what other movies are competing with it. You can sometimes look and say, well, let's do some regression. Let's look at the star power. Is it a sequel? Is there a hit song out? There's lots of things you can do to try to build reasonable models. Most movies decay in popularity. Anybody know a really famous counterexample that started slow and became more popular? I'm sorry? It's been a while. I remember being stuck watching that in grad school because I was friends with a sociology grad student, and she hadn't seen the movie, and she needed somebody who would go with her, and I hadn't seen it, and I got dragged to seeing it. Anybody, this is cultural aside, who is the male star of Titanic? Where did he get his big break? Big break. I'm sorry?
Romeo plus Juliet.
No, way before that. As a child star, he was on a TV show. I'm sorry? Nope. All right, no one knows cultural extra credit today. I don't think Titanic started small and went up. The one that's classically used is the Blair Witch Project, which again is, I think, way before your time. But there's a couple of movies that start small, and then you get a buzz about them. And then as the buzz gets, people start telling people, and people start going more and more, and they start seeing it. Movie theaters love something like that. A lot of times you are stuck with a movie, and it might actually even be in your best interest not to show the movie, even if you have the rights to show it towards the end of its run, because you can do better showing something else. So in terms of figuring out the cost of movies, this can be a very complicated thing. What else do we have? There's an obvious counterpoint to one of the things over here. Yeah, cost of food, arcades. Something like that. Yes?
Tax and insurance.
Tax and insurance. Now, how is the tax a cost? I mean, there's just so many taxes, you've got to be more specific.
Sales tax, depends on the state.
Okay, but the sales tax would be factored into, I think, the stuff over here.
Okay, then property tax.
And that, I think, would be factored in close to rent. I'm sure you can hit them with some kind of tax.
I'm not too familiar with
Okay, have any of you ever stayed in a hotel? What is my favorite tax on staying in a hotel room?
Luxury tax?
Nope. The occupancy tax. When you think about it, we're going to tax you for occupying the room that you're renting. What else are you going to do with a hotel room? There is actually something that people do where they don't actually want to occupy the hotel room. Anybody know? It's a polite PG thing where you never actually want to set foot in the room. A lot of people use it for parking. It's often a lot cheaper to rent a hotel room, and they will let you park in their lot for so many days, and it's cheaper than parking in the lots at airports. So there are a lot of hotels where they will force you to spend one night there. You don't even have to physically get in the room, and then you can keep your car there for a week, and it's actually cheaper to do this than to actually park the car. But you still pay occupancy tax, I believe. So we'll put down taxes. Bless you. But there is another very important, it's related to something over here.
It's not marketing, 'cause you don't really need to market for anything.
Well, we do need some kind of marketing. If we're selling ads, yeah, there's the ad budget. How many of you have heard of the new 24 multiplex theater stereo sound reclining seats that's now available in the Berkshire Mall? No, there's no such thing. But I mean, if you have something that you want people to know about it, you have to have some money reserved for advertising. How much money should you put there? Years ago, when there were phone monopolies, one of the things I loved is the phone companies were limited in terms of how much profit they could make because they were government monopolies. But some of the phone companies found an interesting loophole. They could make a certain percentage of their costs. So if they had expensive ad campaigns for people who had no choice but to use their product, these ad campaigns counted as a cost, and they could make additional money. So they would run commercials about their product. It was inspired. But in the real world, you do want people to know that you have a product. And so when you think about a lot of the commercials you see, which commercials are effective? So, there's lots of different things we have here for MovieEe, to try to figure out what the cost is going to be. And so we can look at, we're trying to maximize profit. We have sources of income. We have sources of revenue. We have costs. Which types of movies do you think we want to show?
It depends on the community. And also the type of theater that you're trying to do. If you look at a theater like Images,
Mm-hmm.
if they were doing big blockbusters, they actually probably wouldn't do as well as they've had. But since they've cultivated this art house
Right.
appeal, they've been able
Absolutely. So depending on where you are and what market you're in, you want to do things differently. But let's say you had your choice, and you could have any group of people come to your theater. What group of people would you want? Yes.
Probably like high school students, that kind of age, like middle school, high school, where they can't really don't have a lot of other weekend alternatives. So I can do adult movies.
I think that's close.
Families?
I'm sorry?
Families? Because they have to pay for their kids and other groups.
the mindless masses who like blockbusters. So we can make them pay a lot.
You're close, but I think you're missing fundamentally who do you want in the theater?
No one.
I'm sorry?
No one.
No one. No, you want people. Do you want? Again, I'm always torn because this is being recorded. I will just pretend it's not being recorded. Do you want old people?
No, you want young people to sit over repeat customers.
They're not going to die that quickly.
Yeah, I think you want, like Katie was saying, like middle school, or family, like middle school students or like family members, because middle school students aren't going to be spending their own money. They're going to buy a bunch of food instead.
That's what you want. Is you want the people who are going to be buying the food.
Hungry.
You want the hungry people. You want people on the dates. You want, mommy, daddy, I want, you want that. That's what you want. Because that you're not sharing with the people who own the films. That's pure profit for you. I mean, people don't realize how expensive it is to make those giant tubs of popcorn. Or to fill up those cups with soda. Okay? So not all of your stuff is the same. There are a lot of things in life where they actually are willing to take a loss on product X to get you to buy product Y. There are some movie theaters where the cost of a movie is like $1. Sure, we'll split the revenue with the company. Yeah, they have it so down, they're not really surviving by the revenue for the film, they're surviving by the revenue for selling the food. So, again, the reason I want to spend so much time on this is it's not always clear what is your problem and what is your goal. That's why it's not bad every now and then to take a day and really think about what are we trying to do. At the end of the day, do you care how you're making your money? For some of us, yes, and there's a lot of movements for divestment, there's a lot of movements to have responsible investments, to work in certain industries. But over here for the movie theater, they may be quite willing to make less money on selling movie tickets and make more money on concessions. Okay, any other general things at this point? All right, so now what we want to do is we want to start coming up with how we would make the movie schedule. All right, so what we have to do is we have to start introducing constraints. Let's see if this will pivot. I'm having a little trouble pivoting. All right, so let's try to figure out what should our variables be. And so because we're going to have binary variables, I'm going to have integer valued things. So typically we like to have binary things that are either 0 or 1, on or off. So we're going to have linear constraints, linear objective functions, but we're going to allow ourselves to have binary variables. A huge part of any of these linear programming problems is going to be trying to figure out what are the constants, what are the parameters that go in. And before I forget, we will be having a visitor from a consulting company coming in later today. The cell phone policy is on hold today, just in case they have trouble finding us. So what are givens? What are variables? So somebody tell me some of the things that we know about our movie theater. Yes?
Only show one movie in a single theater.
That's a constraint. I want givens about my theater first. Yes? We have screens. So S1. So maybe I'll use the letter little s to denote a screen. And we have some number of screens. Yes?
We're assuming you're already in business, right, and are fully functioning? Or
Sure. We'll assume we're fully functional. So we could call this the Death Star fully functional movie theater.
We have number of seats.
So we have capacities. So capacity C sub s in screen s. So unfortunately, we want to use the letter C for many different things, for capacity, for cost. Well, we've now used up the letter C. That is a fix. That is a given. We can't all of a sudden change the capacity. What else? Yes? So we could have labor costs. We'll assume those are fixed for now. But it could include things such as overtime. And so the cost per worker may not be constant throughout the day. Or it could be maybe, if you're working after midnight, we have to give you a bonus. Or if you work more than a certain number of hours in a week, we give you time and a half. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of some of the new laws the federal government has passed has been to shorten people's work weeks. Why is this the case?
If you work more than 30 hours, your employer has to give you health insurance.
Yes, if you work more than 30 hours, you're now eligible, and in fact, it's now mandatory that you get certain benefits. So the way around this is to now make sure that people work below that certain critical threshold. Okay, what else could we have as fixed?
your location.
Location.
So the environment you're working, people that live in different based on.
And so when you're trying to decide where you want to build, this is an important variable. Other things that might be fixed. Some things could either be fixed or could be variable.
Parking?
I'm sorry?
Parking?
I mean, I'll consider that part of location, lumping that all together. What about, I'm sorry?
How much food you're able to produce and sell. I don't know if you would
I'd probably consider that variable. What about, yes?
Number of hours in the day, or number of hours that are reasonable movie hours.
Hours in day. So T goes from, so these are my times. And so if we have something like this, let's see. All right. So if we have a fixed number of times, we may have variable the closing time, but the actual hours in the day is fixed. What about the movies that we can show? The movies we can show, is that fixed or variable?
Variable.
It's variable in terms of you can choose which movies you want to show, or maybe we could say, given that we've already chosen the movies, we then have a fixed number. So the movies could be somewhere in the middle. So that would be M goes from, so I like to use big letters for the final element of my set, and then lowercase letters for the individual elements. If I want to give the whole name to that set, I might use a script M for that set, or maybe a script S for the screens there, just to give some names. All right, what would be some variables for this problem? I'd probably take the cost of the food as not going to change too much. Now, it could be that if you start selling an enormous amount, you might start getting bulk discounts.
Sorry, like the price, like what you charge. You choose.
Oh, okay, what we charge for the food, yes.
Or you spend there.
Right. So then this becomes an interesting question. Are you allowed to change those numbers, or are those numbers fixed? If you can change those numbers, it's no longer a linear programming problem. And things become very difficult now. And so it would be wonderful to be able to adjust it. What you might have to do is you might have to run the model for several different values of prices. Because what you're going to want to do is you want to have at some point a variable that indicates, has a movie been shown, and how much is the demand for it, and what is the revenue stream it generates. And so I think we want to keep prices in the fixed section. And what we might just do is we might just have a bunch of different prices and just see what happens. Yes?
For a given movie, how many screens are we going to be showing it at each time t?
Okay, so this is going to be the key variable for what we're doing, is to try to figure out. So I'm going to let x it's going to be 1 or 0. 1 if at time t on screen, time t, movie M, and here's the key word, starts on screen S. So in a lot of problems, this is the best way to do things. So what I'm doing is I'm making my decision, when do I start the movie? What screen do I start it on? There are other things you could be doing as your variables. Instead of saying it's going to be 1 if at time t movie M starts on screen S, what could we do instead?
Number of minutes left in the film. Sorry, you have 120.
We could probably make that work in a very painful manner, so I will accept that. I was thinking more just, is movie M playing on screen S at time t? And if the answer is yes, then you look at blocks going in certain directions, and you can never have too long of a stretch where the movie is playing. So to me, I think this is the easiest way to formulate what's going on in all scheduling problems like this. When do you start the movie being shown? If the movie is being shown at time 1 o'clock, when is the movie theater going to be available again? Yes.
It depends on the length of the movie.
So it depends on the length of the movie. What else does it depend on?
The amount of time for people to clear out.
The amount of time for people to clear out.
Clean it.
and clean it. A more popular movie with a lot of people, it'll take longer to clear out, and it will probably take longer to clean up, especially if you have food, right? So the movies that sell more food, it could take longer cleanup. So then you have to worry about when is screen available again. Okay? There's a lot of interesting things we can get into. In the old days, they used to have movies on, big, reels of film. And some movies might come on 2 reels of film. Well, if you have something like this, you've got to at some point switch from one reel to another. This would actually allow you to show the same movie on 2 screens at the same time. As long as you've moved on to reel 2, you could then have reel 1 start on another screen. You may have to negotiate with the film company that owns it as to whether or not this is legal. Maybe they would come to some kind of deal with you. Since they only are selling 1 copy to you, they charge you more than 1 copy but less than 2 copies. And maybe you can find some amount that's mutually acceptable to both of you. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to start coming up with some of the constraints. So, trying to figure out what objective function we want to maximize or minimize. It's got to be linear at the end of the day. And so unfortunately, when we're trying to figure out what's the revenue stream, I want to know, is the movie showing? What's the capacity of the screen it's showing at? What's the demand at that time of day? I can't have more people watching it than I have seats. So I'll have maybe a term in terms of the revenue stream that will look like the following. So the swiveling is not. There we go. Come on. There you go. Okay. So we have revenue. Maybe something like X T M S. Then I have the capacity of screen S, and I have the demand at time T for movie M. And I take, do I want the maximum or the minimum? I'm looking at, which do I want? Do I want the maximum of the capacity of the screen and the demand to see the movie? Or do I want the minimum? I think I want minimum. Imagine there are more people who want to see it than the space. Well, if there's more people who want to see it, I can only get C of S people in. Conversely, imagine that there's fewer people than want to see it, then the capacity is not an issue. I want the minimum of this. This involves now using the minimum function, but that's fine because we're going to assume these are constants. I'm not thrilled with this assumption. And so what I don't like about this assumption is this is saying the demand of a movie is independent of the movies it's being shown against. Do you like that assumption? Yes?
No. I also have a question
Mm-hmm.
about the number of movies being shown.
Yep.
So we're not incorporating at all the number of distinct movies being shown in a theater at a given time.
Well, we haven't done any of the constraints yet. Right? We haven't decided to write down constraints. We'll write down 1 constraint today, and I'll turn it over to our guest. Well, I mean, we could look at it as we have a list of candidate movies, and then we draw from that candidate movies which movies we actually show. Or you could say we're fixed. And in fact, you might even be required to show a certain movie. So George Lucas may require you to show The Phantom Menace at least once a day. Probably at a good time.
Your scheduling would matter, like a movie that attracts elderly people.
But that's different. That's in trying to figure out what we can do optimally. Right now, I'm just trying to get a sense of what are our variables. And in terms of maximizing profit, yes, we're going to want to take into account when we should show movies. Right now, I'm just showing if we show at time T movie M at screen S, this is going to be the revenue it's giving. Well, then we have to multiply this by what? By the ticket price we get. Maybe it's the amount we get to keep from that movie. And that could even be a function of time of day. And so when we're trying to decide if this was a variable, we would now have a quadratic constraint over here. Now it turns out you can actually do linear programming with quadratic objective functions. And this is coming in as an objective function. So this is part of the objective function. So the suggestion to allow p to be a variable, that actually may not be so bad. We do have techniques that allow us to handle that. Let's do one constraint. Can somebody give me a natural constraint that must be satisfied for this movie theater? I want a constraint that has to be satisfied.
Non-negative number of movies being shown.
Okay. Can you do a little bit better?
Only one movie per theater per screen.
Good, only one movie per screen at a given time. So for all time, we want to make sure there's at most one movie shown on that screen. So we would look at a sum over all movies. This would be true for all screens. And we look and see, here's TMS. Well, is this the constraint we want? What does this constraint tell me? This sum is how many movies start at time t on screen S. We don't want movies that start. We want there to be at most one movie running. So if I said that this was less than or equal to 1, then that would just tell me I have at most one movie starting at that time. So what I need to do is I need to sum over times. So then I need to sum, t goes from, say, the time we care about to maybe the run length of the movie M, of x of TMS. And so now you specify a time, you specify a screen. I look at all movies that could be playing at that moment in time, and that will be at most 1. Okay, so we'll do more on the constraints of a movie theater on Friday. Okay, but this is how you would start to formulate constraints. And so this is the first of many different constraints you would do. Okay.